Okay, Yvette, let's jump into this conversation because this conversation is it's getting us fired up. You know, we had to flip the mics on and we had to dive into this because I think the community of leaders, math educators need to hear this conversation, but also I think we want to share it. We want to share with the conversation. So remind everybody, this came from a conversation you've had recently with some of the leaders that we talk to on a regular basis, daily, weekly. We speak with leaders who are thinking about, and changing their mathematics programs and strengthening support for teachers. And oftentimes we are, say, guiding that process, but also supporting that process along the way. So give us the lowdown. What are we talking about here? But everybody does know we're talking about assessment because that was in the introduction.
So yes, I had a chance to meet with one of our dynamic leaders recently, and we were doing some planning for an upcoming professional development session. And the big message, the big takeaway from that session that she was trying to share was that all assessment should be an opportunity for growth, including, and the focus for this particular PD was around summative assessment. And that really resonated with me as such an important and critical shift that could be, replicated elsewhere. Just that simple idea that if we are not leveraging even year-end, semester end, these big summative assessments as an opportunity for students to become better mathematicians, then we are missing a huge opportunity.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember myself a long time ago, before I made the assessment journey and switched, the way I was thinking about assessments and assessment for student growth was, that very typical, I think, and this is happening if you look across your schools, if you look across your teachers, assessment practices have not changed, generally. So when you think about the general, widespread of your teachers, you're probably seeing similar things where we're just having regular tests. Those tests get marked. They put in the mark book. The average of the marks get tabulated, and boom, there's your mark. And I used to do that. I used to assess that way. And it wasn't until I started shifting practice that started to make me go wait a minute, I need to I'm learning so much from my students around what they're doing in the classroom. And then sometimes it wasn't matching up what was on, say, the test. And then that was a conflict to me, or for me, right? I was like, oh, okay, I've just worked with this student throughout this week on these topics. And I've seen repeated times where they demonstrated, at expectations for that particular learning goal or that particular, standard. But then when it came to the test, it was something wasn't there. Right. And it was wait a minute, but I know this, but then I have to give them this mark. And there was a conflict here. And then it made me go well, why am I weighting that way more than this? And it was a process we all have to go through of saying what is the purpose of the mark that I'm putting down here? Is the purpose is to record what they know consistently, or what they know now, or what they know in that moment? It's something that I think every teacher has to really think about as what is the purpose of the assessment that they're making? And you're saying this session that one of our leaders was planning was we need to make these teachers aware of this. How are you using assessment for growth, for learning purposes, and not just say assessment of learning and putting in this thing, and that we're not even going to look at that number again. So what are your thoughts? Give me some more thoughts here. Where do you want the listener right now to take home around assessment?
I think there are two big ideas that emerged from my conversation with this leader. These were my aha moments. The first one is that if students don't, they're handed back the assessment, it has a number written on the top, and maybe they know their grade or their percentage. But if they can't clearly articulate what they did well and what their next step is, that is a huge miss for us. Because if we look, of course, at John Hattie's work around effect size, the number one effect size is self-grading, because that means that students have ownership over their learning. They're the ones in the pilot seat. They're the ones who are, internalizing the learning that's happening, and they own the learning goals. So if they can't, I have this with my own son where he comes home with a test and it has a score on it. And I say, well, so what did you need to improve on? What could you have done differently? And if he can't articulate that, then that assessment really isn't putting him in the pilot seat of his own learning journey. Assessment isn't something that should be done to students. It is something that should be done with students to support them in understanding where they are relative to the learning objectives. I think you also brought up the other point that we wanted to really confirm is that like you and I both are like, we don't have anything against unit tests. Like there's a time and a place where we're comfortable with kids sitting down and showing us what they know through product. But we also have to validate that result. So to your point, if I've seen a student engaging with the mathematics routinely over the course of the last month, and then on the day of the exam, they make a mistake, they perform poorly, does that discount everything else that I've seen them do up until that point?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's what we need to kind of wrap our minds around as educators, as leaders of other educators, is how much do we trust our professional judgment? And I think I was saying before about the way I shifted, and I said that I shifted my assessment practices because I had shifted my instructional practices. And when I did that, I got chances and opportunities to observe student learning that I was not having before. Like my structure of like, hey, here's the examples, here's the homework, go ahead and have at it. And only the students that say came to my desk, because I would literally go sit down at the desk and then they would come to me and with the questions and I would answer those questions. I only saw kids when they brought me questions, and that was it. Like I didn't get to interact with students. So when you shift the instruction, all of a sudden you're interacting with students, you learn so much more. But when you start learning so much more, this is where that kind of like conflict came up. But I think where I want to make a point about those experiences that you gain is that so much of like our biases are in that test, that unit test or those quizzes, that we don't trust our own professional judgment, our own experience that we have with those students. Like when I would say that, like, I know that they witnessed this, but I can't give it to them because they didn't say, do it on the test. It's like, well, like we're professionals. We've been let's say you've been teaching for a number of years. You're not like a rookie teacher here. Maybe you're a professional. You are actually getting paid to, give your professional opinion around student learning. And we would say like, oh, I got to just wait for this test to show up, right? Like we have to give ourselves more credit that we have good instincts. We have a great like understanding of where students are on their, say, learning journey. And if we don't, we should, because we can trust our professional judgment at that point that say like, okay, I've seen these expectations come in, or I've witnessed, I'm seeing a consistent action on that particular learning outcome. And when I get to the unit test, that should just confirm what I already know, right? It has to just kind of go like, this is the thing I already knew. Great. All right. Another piece of evidence that I can file away that says, yep, one more piece of evidence that says exactly what I know already. And when it doesn't match up, you have to be able to trust your professional judgment that says like, no, this isn't the weighting that I need to give it, because I have to trust that they have this, they've demonstrated this consistently. We have to give more weighting to that component, our observations, our conversations with students, not necessarily more than the product, but it has to be a component of it. And we have to trust ourselves that we know what we're doing. We know where students are on they say these learning outcomes, so that we can change that mark or put a different grade down for that particular learning goal or that particular, let's say, unit test that covers standards. Like that's an important component of like being able to say like professional judgment matters. And you probably have teachers who are still not trusting themselves that matters.
For sure. And so as leaders, why does work around assessment make a difference? Like, it's like if we only have so much time and energy to target one area. The reason I think maybe assessment, for some might be the right fit is because assessment tells us a lot about what we value in mathematics. So at the end of the day, if, we make all these changes to our practice, but then our assessment is still prioritizing speed, or it's prioritizing the correct answer only, or,
right.
Then that tells kids what mathematics is, it kind of shapes their experience as a mathematician in school. So
Totally,
it's like time well spent.
Right. It's like you can have your students, you can tell your students all day long that you value their thinking, but then if you don't actually like consider their thinking in their assessment, and when you report those assessments, you're telling them exactly what you value. And then you're not shaping the culture of your classroom. You're not actually proving it to them, because kids are going to quickly learn. They'd be like, oh, it only matters on the test or on the quiz or on the assignment. And it actually and then you get students saying like, does this count for grades? Like how many times have we heard that from students, instead of saying like, you know what, everything counts. Everything counts, because when I see it, or when I help you, or it adds to my understanding of where you are on the learning journey, and that matters, because my number that I'm going to put down for that particular learning outcome, if I need to put down a number, is going to be representative of what I know about you and where you are on that learning goal at that moment. Like that's what the number is supposed to mean. So make sure that you're, taking into account multiple forms of evidence, and also trusting that professional judgment we have. So let's pivot here, because we were talking with our leader, our great, leader who was planning this session. We were help planning that particular session for them. And I think when we're planning professional development, or we're structuring the support we want to give teachers, and we want to focus on assessment, because focusing on assessment matters. And it could be like could be one of your priorities or your objectives for the year, to say like, you know what, I need to shift the assessment practices here in this school or here in this district, because if we shift the assessment practices, we can start to shift instructional practices. And that's going to all of a sudden change the way students are behaving around mathematics and understanding mathematics, and also believing they're mathematicians. So if we make a point to say we want to shift assessment practices, how do we do it? Like we've been probably saying like, yes, I've been wanting to do this for a long time. Like the people listening to a math podcast around teaching probably don't need to be told exactly that that's an important component of the work that they need to do. If they decide that that's the most important component of the work that they're going to do this year, like what are we going to do to like move the needle? What do you think, Yvette?
We were actually talking earlier, John, about just some structures that have actually worked for us in the past, and things as simple as moderated marking, or coming together as a grade level or division to look at a common assessment and talk about how we're going to score it and what we're going to value in student responses. So creating communities of practice that can come together and actually challenge one another, help us see things maybe differently. Sometimes when we're writing an assessment or administering an assessment, we are looking for one answer or one way of responding to that question. But by actually doing the assessment ahead of time with colleagues, and even just in that practice of actually completing the assessment yourself before your students do with others, you're likely going to realize that there are multiple ways to solve those questions, and there should be. And so that's going to better position you to value student thinking on the assessment, because what I'd hate to see happen is for a student to actually answer something beautifully and it with a tremendous amount of mathematical understanding, but then maybe the teacher didn't see it that way or couldn't see it that way, and so now they get a 0 or they lose marks, when in reality we need to be valuing.
You didn't do it my way. You didn't do it the way that I was anticipating you to do it, and I only anticipated one way actually. And it's not. And I actually, maybe I don't understand that what you did, but I just don't see that it's the same as what I've done. And then they would say, well, this is the way we did it in class, and therefore you should mimic it and follow it and not actually account for it. So I completely agree. It's like what you're saying is we need to create opportunities for teachers to engage in this learning and this work, right? It's like if we expect to have change, what opportunities have we crafted for people to have a different view of around what it is we're looking for in, say, that particular standard or a group of standards or a unit? Like, what is the main idea here? Like, what are the overarching things that matter here when we're, say, looking at what we're trying to report on for in this collection of standards? And I think we want to think about how to, like, a lot of times we might design, say, something or show them something. But like here, this is the funny thing about, say, professional development. I know that you just built a series on professional development and what that looks like. And I think a lot of times when we start designing, like how are we creating experiences, we take it for granted, or we assume a few things. And one of the things I think we assume is that like they're adults. They're not kids. And when we ask, like what we want our teachers to be doing with our students is crafting these unique experiences for kids to like engage in mathematics and share thinking. Like we're asking them to do that, but then we maybe aren't doing that with our educators. So we're not crafting experiences for them to do the exact same thing, the exact same learning behaviors that we're asking them to do with students. But we're like, no, they're adults, so they just need to hear it, and we'll share the ideas with them. And the adults are saying like, just share the ideas with me. You know why? Because they're the same kids that say like, don't get me to think. I'd rather not think today. And that's what adults go through. And we start to go, okay, well, you're right. We're not going to craft, that experience, but like you have to craft the experience for them to have the epiphany. Like this matters. And if we want them to like shift some assessment practices, we got to put them in a situation where they're looking at solving that problem in different ways, or maybe all of a sudden we have exemplars and we're saying like, well, what do you think about that? And what do you think about that? Like one of the most impactful professional development things I had that helped shift my assessment practices was being involved in moderated marking, where we all gave students the same problems from different grade, from the same grade, from the same class. We came together to mark them. And really what we were doing is, and I don't think I saw it at the time, but really what the facilitator was doing is like, this is for you to make sure there's alignment amongst your department, but also so that you can see what kids are doing in different scenarios, like different things. So it's like when you mark it a level 3 or a 3 out of 4, and that teacher over there is marketing a level 3 over 4, like, are you in alignment? Are you looking for the same things? And then the conversation, even if you're trying to do like check mark marking, the conversation will always come out is like, well, what are we really looking for here? Like, why did you give that a 3 and I gave it a 2 or a 1? And that conversation is the most important conversation you're trying to craft for teachers, is having that. Like when you craft an experience for moderated marking to happen, like you get good results.
So what I heard you just say is that the person doing the talking is doing the thinking.
Same as kids, right?
Yeah. So if we're creating structures for educators to reflect on their assessment practices, to just do better by kids, just to have fair assessment practices that honor student thinking and support student growth and help them see themselves as a capable and confident mathematician, then we need to create the environment where teachers are digging in and doing the work.
Totally. And here's another thought about, and this is a thought not necessarily about assessment. It's just a thought about any sort of program design or adoption. You're trying to like help teachers shift something like practice. It could be, teaching practice or routine. Is people, and this is true about people in general, I think, is like people need to be reminded more than need to be taught new things. So what I mean by that is like, you might be listening to this and said, we did moderated marking, we've done that before. It didn't work. Right. Or I thought it would work, or it's like, we've done it, but nothing took hold. And it was like, well, you didn't do it enough, right? You didn't do it enough. You didn't remind them enough. You thought, hey, this is going to work for this short year, maybe, and then we're going to switch focuses. The switching of the focuses is a huge issue in education. Is you have to stick with things longer, and it's longer than you think. So that's why it's like people need to be reminded about the most important things about what we're doing, and that's why choosing your like the objectives for the 5 years is really important to stick, get closer to the vision of math that you want in your classrooms, is because you don't want to switch those focuses. So if you are serious about changing assessment practices in your buildings, you have to say, okay, I want to craft experiences for my educators to do moderated marking or come to different community sessions together where they're doing some of this thinking and talking about their own assessment practices. Like you have to commit to that for a long period of time if you are actually seeing or wanting to see results around that particular idea or assessment in general. It is true for any shift you're trying to make. Like, you have to say commit for a long time. You can't just say like, 1 year and that's it. Like, you're not going to see the results. You said it, you train them, and they're like, okay, I'm good. I'm good. I'm done. So we've done that. It's like me teaching a class and saying like, I taught this to students, and then the next year they're like, you never taught it to us. It's the same idea. We have to say, if these things matter, you have to consistently embed them in everything you're doing for a long time. It's likely that if you did 3-4 sessions, you're probably going to need to do 20, 25. You're going to have to just keep doing it. And then you're going to see the teachers who have been resistant, or the teachers who are like, I don't understand, or I don't get what's happening here. They will start to kind of come along the ride because you keep talking about it.
So what I'm hearing, John, is that we have to make it important enough, consistent enough, that it just becomes part of the culture. That this is just the way we do business. Like, when I'm going to do an assessment, I get feedback from others. I, plan as much common assessment as I can so that I know that we can moderate together. And it all comes back to, when we say this all the time, it's like, who is in your community? And every teacher needs a community. And sometimes they emerge organically, but for those who it has not, leaders need to create the space for those communities to exist.
Totally. And, when you're hearing this, you're saying, well, if I'm going to commit a lot of time to assessment, it's like, isn't that going to take all my time? Like, what about all the other things? And you have to say, yeah, like, that's why you can't focus on too many things. You have to focus on some things, and not, because you focus on too many, you're actually focusing on none. So pick the things that you think are important. Assessment's a great one, because when you start focusing on assessment, so many other things start to change, and like practices start to change, thoughts, mindsets start to change. Like, assessment is a huge one for starting, this process. So if you all of a sudden let your foot up off the gas, you're not going to be, say, as ahead as you want it to be.
And even just the simple fact of, if teachers are coming together and being asked to actually do the assessment before their students, and they're engaging in mathematics together, their content knowledge is going to improve as well.
Totally. Like, we have a district right now, one of their main focuses is on, it's not just assessment, but it is like mainly in there. Like what you're saying, it's like they're all kind of blended together, but the assessment is a major factor of the reason why they're doing this session of in their PLCs. They are doing what's called a lesson internalization process. They are taking the curriculum resource, they're unpacking it together in grade band groupings, and walking through, what are the big ideas that we want to enforce? What does it look like at the end of the unit? So they start with that assessment and go like, what are we looking for? What are the big ideas? What are the strategies we want to travel from grade level to grade level, from unit to unit? What are the models we're looking for in this particular unit? Let's make sure we're all comfortable around that, and do some of these questions so we feel comfortable around that. And they do that on a regular basis. Like, that's some really impactful work that helps move the needle on assessment practices, but also moves the needle on pedagogical moves and the content knowledge. So people need to be like, you got to remind them, you got to do this more than this instead of new. And here's the other thing. I was just talking with a leader just before this, before we flipped the mic on to record this. And we were talking about like why we might shift focuses is sometimes saying the same thing over and over again, and working on the same things over and over again might feel boring to us. It's like, all of a sudden it's like, but I've said that so many times. I'm like, you got to keep saying it. You got to keep doing the same things, even though you might be getting bored. It's like, as soon as you're like, well, if I'm bored, I'm going to go grab this new thing. I'm going to go to this conference. Hey, I got this great new idea. Let's slide that in. And then all of a sudden you've let your foot up off the gas and said what's important. And you've changed what's important to the educators. And that's something that we might want to just hold back on. But then you also have to say, sometimes there's time and room for that, but it's not like every time. It's like, we got to remember where the importance lies and where the impact will lie. And assessment, I think, is a really great one to keep your foot on the gas on.
Thanks, John, for entertaining this topic today. I know we both are super passionate about assessment. It had a huge impact on our own classroom practice and just the experience that we created for students. So we're so fortunate to be working with so many districts who are also really seeing the value in this particular focus of their work, and inspiring us to continue to reflect on the impact of assessment in math classrooms.
All right, Yvette, thanks so much.